The first sign that something was wrong wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a fight or a screaming match or a slammed door. It was an email that wasn't meant for me. It arrived on a Tuesday morning at 6:42 a.m., slipped quietly into my inbox while I was making coffee before work. The subject line read, "Updated guest list, final." I almost deleted it. It looked like one of those endless family emails that floated around before holidays or events, the kind I was usually copied on, out of habit rather than necessity. But what stopped me was the sender, my older sister, Lauren Whitmore. And what stopped my hand completely was the first line of preview text. "We need to make sure Emma isn't included this time. Mom agrees." My name is Emma Whitmore. I was 32 years old at the time, and according to that email, my own family was actively discussing how to exclude me. I stood in my small kitchen in Portland, Oregon, the coffee maker hissing behind me, my phone vibrating gently in my hand. For a long moment, I didn't open the message. I just stared at the preview, trying to convince myself there was some reasonable explanation, that maybe I was misreading it, that Emma referred to someone else. It didn't. When I finally opened the email, the truth landed clean and sharp, without mercy. The message chain was long, detailed, strategic. Lauren was coordinating her Christmas Eve wedding, not a small courthouse ceremony, a full event at the Hawthorne estate, a restored mansion outside Salem that our parents had been bragging about for months. Caterers, photographers, a guest list capped at exactly 120 people. And threaded through the replies was a quiet consensus. "Emma complicates things. It's better if she doesn't come. She'll understand. She always does." My mother, Diane Whitmore, had replied with a simple sentence that burned more than the rest. "This day isn't about her." I scrolled slowly, my thumb steady despite the rush of heat in my chest. My father, Thomas Whitmore, hadn't written much. He never did. His response was one line: "Do what you think is best, Lauren." There it was, the familiar abdication. The same silence he'd perfected my entire life. I didn't cry. That surprised me. What I felt instead was a strange clarity, like something that had been out of focus for years had finally snapped into place. This wasn't sudden. This was patterned. I set my phone down, poured my coffee, and sat at the small table by the window. Outside, the city was waking up. Cars passed. A neighbor walked her dog. The world didn't pause just because my family had quietly decided I was optional. If you had asked anyone who knew us, they would have described the Whitmores as close, successful, stable, the kind of family that sent matching Christmas cards and posted carefully curated photos every Thanksgiving. My parents lived in a large house in Lake Oswego, the kind with a circular driveway and a piano no one played. My sister Lauren, 35, was a real estate attorney, married, now soon to be remarried, into a family with connections. My younger brother Caleb, 29, worked for my father's logistics company and was being groomed for leadership despite having no real interest or aptitude. And then there was me, Emma, the quiet one, the reliable one, the one who didn't cause problems. I worked as an operations manager for a mid-sized nonprofit. No prestige, no big salary. But I was good at what I did. I paid my bills. I lived alone. I didn't ask for help, which, in my family, translated to, I didn't matter. The exclusion hadn't started with the wedding. It never does. It starts with small edits, subtle omissions, conversations that happen just out of earshot. My birthday had been forgotten 2 years in a row, not maliciously, just overlooked. Thanksgiving seating arrangements always placed me at the far end of the table, near cousins or family friends. Decisions were made without consulting me, then explained afterward as if that was generosity. I had learned, slowly and thoroughly, to make myself easy. Lauren used to joke about it. "Emma's low maintenance," she'd say, laughing. "She doesn't need much." What she meant was that I didn't demand space. I scrolled back to the top of the email chain. There it was again. The phrase that settled something deep in my chest. She'll understand. I always did. But this time, something shifted. At 8:15 a.m., my phone rang. "Lauren, I watched it buzz on the table until it stopped. At 8:17, she texted, "Hey Em, quick question. Are you busy Christmas Eve?" I didn't reply. I finished my coffee, got dressed, and went to work like nothing had happened. I answered emails, I ran meetings, I approved budgets. On the outside, my life remained orderly. Inside, I began taking inventory. By noon, I had forwarded the email chain to my personal account. By 3 p.m., I had saved screenshots. By 6, I had opened a folder on my laptop and named it something neutral, family. I didn't know why I was doing it yet. I just knew better than to let things disappear. That night, I sat on my couch and replayed every moment where I had chosen silence over discomfort, where I had accepted explanations that didn't make sense, where I had told myself this was just how families worked. And for the first time, I allowed myself to ask a different question. What if this wasn't love at all? What if it was control, dressed up as convenience? At 9:43 p.m., another email came in, this one from my mother. Subject line, Christmas plans. We assume you'll be fine spending the holiday on your own this year. It's just easier this way. Easier. That word finally did what years of neglect hadn't. It made me stop trying. I didn't reply that night, or the next day. Instead, I opened my calendar and marked December 24th with a single note. Pay attention, because something told me that missing this wedding wasn't the real loss. It was the beginning of something else entirely. And I had a feeling my family had no idea what they had just started. The day after the email, my mother called like nothing had happened. That, more than anything else, told me how normalized my exclusion had become. "Emma," she said cheerfully, as if we'd spoken the night before. "Did you get my message?" "I did," I replied. There was a pause. Brief. Calculated. "Well," she continued, "we just assumed you'd understand. Lauren's wedding is very curated, small, intimate." I pictured the guest list spreadsheet from the email. 120 people. Judges, business partners, friends of friends, second cousins I barely knew. But not me. "I understand," I said. The words came out easily. Too easily. "That's good," my mother said, relieved. "You've always been mature about these things." Mature. Another word that sounded like praise, but felt like a lid being pressed down. We hung up a minute later. No discussion. No apology. No acknowledgement that anything unusual had happened. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time after that call, staring at the wall across from me. It was plain, white, undecorated. I had never bothered to hang pictures. Temporary spaces had always felt safer. At work, I kept my head down. I didn't mention the wedding. I didn't mention my family. But something in my posture must have changed, because my colleague Jenna asked if I was okay. "I'm fine," I said. And for the first time, that answer felt incomplete. That evening, I went through my old documents. Not because I had a plan, but because I needed to ground myself in something concrete. Pay stubs, contracts, tax returns. Boring proof of an independent life. That was when I found something I hadn't thought about in years. A scanned copy of my grandmother's handwritten letter. Eleanor Whitmore, my father's mother. The only person in my family who had ever looked at me without measuring what I could offer in return. She had died when I was 24. Quietly. In her sleep. The family mourned politely, efficiently, then moved on. But before she passed, she had given me a letter, folded carefully. Told me to keep it somewhere safe. "You don't need it now," she'd said, "but you will." At the time, I thought she meant emotionally. I opened the file and read her words again. "Emma, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer around to say things plainly. I see how they treat you. They think your silence means consent. It doesn't. One day you'll understand the difference between being needed and being controlled. When that day comes, choose yourself. And don't explain." I closed the file slowly. The next few weeks passed in a strange fog. Lauren sent a group message about wedding colors, then another about hotel blocks. I wasn't included in either, but Caleb was. He texted me privately once. "Hey, you okay with all this?" "Yes," I typed. That was true, in a narrow sense. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was something else. Alert. Thanksgiving came and went without much drama. I spent it with a friend from work and her family. They asked polite questions, didn't pry. No one expected me to perform gratitude for scraps of attention. The contrast was unsettling. 2 weeks later, my father called. "We need to talk about something," he said. My chest tightened slightly. "Okay." "About the house," he continued. "What house?" "The lake property. Your grandmother's old place." My grip tightened on the phone. "That house was sold," I said, "years ago." "That's what you were told," he replied. The words landed heavier than I expected. Apparently, the sale had never fully gone through. There had been a delay, then a restructuring, then paperwork that was never finalized. The property had been transferred into a family holding trust. "A formality," my father said. "It didn't concern you." "Why are you telling me now?" I asked. Another pause. "Lauren and I think it might be time to liquidate it," he said. "The wedding expenses are adding up." There it was. The wedding again. "And?" I asked. "And," he continued, "technically, your grandmother named you as a contingent beneficiary. It's outdated, but it complicates things." I closed my eyes. "So you need me to sign something?" I said. "Yes," he replied, relieved that I'd made it easy for him. "Just to streamline the process." Streamline. Another familiar word. "I'll need to see the documents," I said. There was a beat of silence. "You trust us, don't you?" my father asked. I thought of the email, the guest list, the quiet agreement that my absence made things easier. "I trust paperwork," I said. "Send them." He didn't like that answer. I could hear it in his breathing. "I'll have our attorney forward everything," he said finally. That night, I lay awake longer than usual. For the first time, the pieces were lining up into something coherent. The wedding, the exclusion, the sudden need for my signature. This wasn't about celebration. It was about consolidation. I realized then how carefully my role had been managed over the years. Kept close enough to be useful, distant enough to be ignored, trusted to comply without questioning. And I understood something else, something colder and clearer. If I signed whatever they put in front of me, I would disappear permanently. Not just from photos or events, from records, from rights, from anything that could ever be reclaimed. The documents arrived 3 days later. A thick PDF, dense with legal language, trust amendments, asset transfers, signatures already prepared. My name appeared exactly once, at the bottom, next to a line that said, "Waiver of all present and future claims." I didn't sign. Instead, I forwarded the file to a local attorney, whose name I found through a quiet search. No referrals, no family connections. Her assistant replied within an hour, "We can meet tomorrow." I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell Lauren. I didn't even tell myself what I was going to do next. But as I closed my laptop that night, one thing was certain. Missing the wedding was no longer the worst thing that could happen. Losing my place quietly would be. And I wasn't going to let that happen. The attorney's office was on the 3rd floor of a brick building downtown, the kind that had survived multiple economic cycles without ever trying to look modern. The sign on the door read, "Marisol Vega, Attorney at Law." No slogans, no smiling stock photos. I liked that. Marisol was in her early 40s, sharp-eyed, with dark hair pulled back tightly, and a voice that didn't waste syllables. She scanned the documents in silence for several minutes, occasionally making notes in the margins with a pen she clearly trusted. "These aren't wedding papers," she said finally. I nodded. "That's what I thought." "This is a full release," she continued. "If you sign this, you're giving up any claim to the Whitmore family trust, present or future, including assets you may not even know exist." I leaned back in the chair, my hands folded in my lap. They told me it was just a formality. She let out a short breath that might have been a laugh in another context. That's what people say when they don't want questions. She turned the document toward me and tapped a paragraph halfway down the page. "This clause," she said, "was added recently, within the last 6 months." "How can you tell?" I asked. "Because it references a restructuring that didn't exist before then," she replied. "Someone's planning ahead." Planning ahead. Lauren's wedding was 3 weeks away. My attorney looked up at me. "Do you know why they suddenly need this sign?" "They want to sell my grandmother's lake house," I said. She raised an eyebrow. "The property in Bend?" "Yes. That house is not small," she said carefully. "And it's not simple." I swallowed. "I've never even been there alone." "That's intentional," she said. Marisol explained what my father hadn't. Eleanor Whitmore's property had appreciated significantly over the last decade, not just because of the land, but because of zoning changes and proximity to a new development corridor. It wasn't just sentimental value, it was leverage. And you, she said, looking directly at me, are the complication. That word again. What happens if I don't sign? I asked. They can't proceed cleanly, she replied. And they don't want messy. Messy draws attention. I thought about the email chain, the quiet consensus that I was better left out. What do you recommend? I asked. Marisol closed the folder. I recommend you do nothing. Yet, nothing had always been my role. But this nothing felt different. When I got home, my phone buzzed. Lauren. Hey, Em, she said brightly when I answered. Dad mentioned you had some questions about the trust stuff. Did he? I replied. He's stressed, she continued. We all are. The wedding is expensive, and honestly, this property thing is just old baggage. Signing would make things easier. For who? I asked. For everyone, she said quickly. I pictured her at her kitchen island, phone tucked between shoulder and ear, probably multitasking. She had always been efficient with conversations she considered administrative. I need time, I said. Her tone cooled. There really isn't much. I'll let you know, I replied. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my apartment and replayed the conversation. Not what she said, but how she said it. The subtle impatience. The assumption that my compliance was a given. They weren't asking. They were informing. 2 days later, my mother showed up unannounced. I hadn't lived close enough for drop-ins in years. That alone told me something had shifted. She stood in my doorway, impeccably dressed, eyes scanning my apartment as if assessing its permanence. You look tired, she said. I am, I replied. She sat without being invited, folding her hands neatly in her lap. We're worried about you, she said. I almost laughed. You don't come to the wedding, she continued. You don't sign the paperwork. You barely call. It feels like you're pulling away. I met her gaze. I've been standing still for years. You just stopped noticing. Her lips pressed into a thin line. This isn't fair. Neither is erasing me quietly, I said. She looked genuinely startled. That's not what we're doing. It is, I replied. You just don't call it that. She stood abruptly. I didn't raise you to be difficult. That word again. Difficult. When she left, she didn't hug me. The next week, Caleb called. I don't want to be in the middle, he said immediately. Then don't, I replied. But Dad's saying you're stalling, he continued. That this is going to delay things. I closed my eyes. Caleb, do you know what you're asking me to give up? A pause. Longer this time. No, he admitted. That's the problem, I said. The wedding countdown began to dominate family communications. Group messages buzzed, photos of floral arrangements, seating charts, everyone acting as if nothing else existed. Except the emails from my father's attorney, gentle reminders, polite urgency. By the second reminder, Marisol had reviewed everything. They're pressuring you, she said, which tells me they're nervous. What happens if I refuse outright? I asked. They escalate, she replied. They'll try guilt, then isolation. Then they'll paint you as unreasonable. I smiled faintly. They're already doing that. Good, she said. Then you won't be surprised. The night before the wedding, I received one final message from Lauren. I hope you're happy, she wrote. This is hurting, Mom. I stared at the screen for a long time before typing my response. I didn't create this situation. I just stopped absorbing it. She didn't reply. The wedding photos appeared online the next day. Lauren glowing in white, my parents beaming, Caleb smiling stiffly beside them. No empty space where I should have been. It was as if I'd never existed. And that was the moment I stopped wondering if I was overreacting. Because people don't erase what they value. They erase what they think they own. I opened my laptop, pulled up the trust documents again, and for the first time read them not as something I needed to comply with, but as something I needed to understand. If they were planning to move without me, I needed to know exactly what ground I was standing on, and I had a feeling that ground was about to become very important. The week after the wedding passed without ceremony. No one called to ask how I was. No one checked in. The family group chat, which I had never been removed from, but was clearly no longer meant for me, filled with photos and inside jokes from the reception. I watched quietly, not responding, not reacting. Silence, I was learning, was a language they only understood when it disrupted their plans. On Thursday afternoon, an envelope arrived by courier. Not email, not regular mail. Courier. Inside were the same trust documents, now printed on heavy paper, tabs marked in pale blue, signature lines flagged with yellow stickers. A handwritten note from my father sat on top. Emma, no greeting, no affection. Just a deadline. I took the packet to Marisol's office the next morning. She didn't say anything when I placed it on her desk. She just opened it, flipped to the back, and nodded slowly. "They've sweetened it," she said. "What does that mean?" I asked. "They added a modest payout," she replied. "A one-time distribution, in exchange for permanent release." "How modest?" I asked. She told me the number. It was enough to feel tempting. Enough to make someone like me, who had never expected much, hesitate. Enough to sound generous to anyone who didn't understand what was being surrendered. "They think this makes it fair," I said. "They think this makes you grateful," Marisol corrected. I looked at the last page again. My name, printed neatly. A space for my signature. A space for a witness. If I signed, the lake house would be sold. The trust would be consolidated. My name would never appear in any future document again. It would be clean. It would be quiet. And it would be final. "I'm not signing this," I said. Marisol smiled slightly. "I didn't think you would." "What do I do instead?" I asked. She slid a single page toward me. "You sign this." It was a notice of non-consent. Simple, direct, legally unambiguous. By signing it, I wasn't demanding anything. I wasn't contesting the trust. I wasn't escalating. I was refusing to disappear. "I want to file this," I said. "We will," she replied, "and we'll do it properly." The notice was sent that afternoon. Certified, documented, copied to every attorney involved. I didn't tell my family. I didn't need to. They found out within hours. My father called first. "What did you do?" he asked. "I declined," I replied. "You didn't decline," he said sharply. "You obstructed." I stayed calm. I exercised my rights. "You don't understand what you're risking," he said. "I understand exactly what I'm protecting," I replied. He hung up. Lauren called next. Not yelling. Controlled. Dangerous. "You just humiliated us," she said. "I didn't speak to anyone," I replied. "You forced our lawyers to respond," she snapped. "Do you know how that looks?" "I imagine it looks inconvenient," I said. She exhaled hard. "Why are you doing this?" The question wasn't curious. It was accusatory. "Because I was excluded," I said, and then asked to erase myself on paper. "That's not fair," she said. "No," I replied. "It's accurate." She didn't speak for a long moment. "You're not going to win," she said finally. "I'm not trying to," I replied. That confused her. I could hear it in her silence. The next move came 3 days later. A letter from the family attorney outlining potential consequences of delay. Missed opportunities, financial inefficiencies, emotional strain. Marisol read it once and slid it back to me. "They're posturing," she said. "They want you scared." I wasn't. Something had shifted the moment I signed that notice. For the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was deciding. That weekend, I drove to Ben. I hadn't planned to. It just felt necessary. The lake house sat at the end of a narrow road, partially hidden by tall pines. It was smaller than I'd imagined. Older, weathered in places, but solid. I stood on the porch for a long time, breathing in the cold air, listening to nothing but wind and water. This place had existed without me knowing it mattered, just like I had. Inside, dust covered the furniture, a thin layer of neglect. But there were signs of care, too. Curtains still intact, dishes neatly stacked, a framed photo on the mantel. My grandmother, younger, smiling, standing right where I was. I understood then why she had written that letter. She had known. I locked the door behind me and drove back to Portland before dark. On Monday morning, another email arrived. This one wasn't from my family. It was from the county records office. Subject: clarification requested. Whitmore Trust property. They had received conflicting instructions. I forwarded it to Marisol without comment. She called me 10 minutes later. "Things are about to get very uncomfortable for them," she said. "For me too," I replied. "Yes," she said. "But here's the difference. You're not pretending anymore." By Tuesday, the pressure escalated. My mother left 3 voicemails, emotional, fragmented, accusing me of tearing the family apart. Caleb texted, "Dad's really upset." Lauren sent a final message. "If you don't fix this, don't expect to be part of anything going forward." I read it carefully. Then I replied, I already wasn't. And for the first time, that didn't feel like loss. It felt like clarity, because now the illusion was gone. And once illusions collapse, only structures remain, legal ones. And I was standing on mine. The first official response didn't come from my family. It came from the county. A formal notice arrived in my mailbox on a gray Wednesday morning, folded precisely, stamped with the seal of Deschutes County. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't accuse anyone of wrongdoing. It simply stated that due to inconsistent filings related to the Whitmore Family Trust, a review of property ownership and trust administration had been initiated. Review, not investigation. Yet, I read the letter twice, then set it down carefully on my kitchen counter. My hands were steady. That surprised me. When Marisol called an hour later, she didn't sound surprised at all. "This is standard," she said. "Once a notice of non-consent is filed and assets are moved or prepared for sale, the county has to verify authority. Your family assumed everything was consolidated. It isn't." "What does a review mean practically?" I asked. "It means paper," she replied. "Lots of it. Timelines, signatures, amendments. And it means they can't sell anything until it's resolved." I pictured my father's face when he talked about the wedding expenses. The urgency. The assumption that everything would fall into place. Nothing was falling anymore. That afternoon, my father's attorney emailed Marisol requesting a call. She forwarded it to me with a single sentence. "They're trying to regain control of the narrative." She took the call without me. Later, she summarized it calmly. "They're claiming administrative confusion," she said, "suggesting you misunderstood the intent of the documents." "Did they mention the email chain?" I asked. "No," she replied. "They don't know you have it." I nodded slowly. That email chain had become something else now. Not leverage. Not revenge. Context. It was proof that what was happening wasn't an accident. It was a plan. The next escalation came from an unexpected place, my workplace. My supervisor, Alan, asked me to step into his office late Thursday afternoon. He closed the door gently, not urgently. "This is informal," he said, "but I wanted to check in." I waited. "We received a call," he continued, "from someone identifying themselves as a family representative. They raised concerns about your availability during the holidays." There it was. Subtle. Clean. Plausibly innocent. "I wasn't aware my family had authority to speak on my behalf," I said. Alan frowned slightly. "Neither were we. Which is why I wanted to ask you directly." I took a breath. "There's a legal dispute in progress involving an inheritance. It doesn't affect my work." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Thank you for clarifying," he said. "If anything else comes up, let HR know." When I left his office, something inside me hardened. This wasn't just about assets. They were testing how far they could reach. That night, I called Marisol. "They're pressuring my job," I said. "What do we do?" I asked. "We document," she replied, "and we prepare." 2 days later, she filed a formal request for trust accounting. Not emotional, not accusatory, just procedural. It required my parents to produce detailed records of trust management over the last 10 years. Income, disbursements, asset valuations, amendments. But order and transparency aren't the same thing. The response window was 30 days. The call, no messages from my mother. No texts from Lauren. No updates from Caleb. Silence this time wasn't confidence. It was calculation. I spent the next few weeks focused on my own life. Work deadlines, long walks, evenings reading instead of replaying conversations in my head. And slowly, I realized something. The tension that had lived in my chest for years was fading. Not because things were resolved, but because I had stopped waiting for approval. The accounting documents arrived 3 weeks later. Boxes, literal boxes, delivered to Marisol's office. She called me the moment she opened them. "They overcorrected," she said. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means they tried to bury inconsistencies under volume," she replied. and that never works. I went to her office the next day. The boxes were stacked against the wall, labeled by year. She had already started sorting. "Your grandmother was meticulous," she said, holding up an old ledger. "Your parents were selective." I watched as she laid documents side by side. Amendments that referenced meetings that never occurred. Disbursements labeled vaguely. Transfers between entities without clear justification. Not criminal, but careless. And carelessness is dangerous when scrutiny appears. "They assumed no one would ever look this closely," Marisol said. I thought of my father's voice. "Do what you think is best." He'd never thought I'd be the one asking questions. The county followed up within days. A clarification request. Then another. The review was becoming something else. An audit. Lauren broke the silence that evening. Her message was shorter than usual. "You're taking this too far." I read it once. Then twice. Then I typed. I didn't take it anywhere. I stayed where I was. She responded immediately. "This is hurting Mom." I didn't reply. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood that caring had always been the lever. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in weeks. The next morning, Marisol sent me an email with the subject line, "Important." "They missed something," she wrote. Attached was a scanned page from an old amendment, Eleanor Whitmore's handwriting. Clear, intentional. A clause that had never been executed. A clause that, under specific conditions, granted discretionary authority to a contingent beneficiary. Me. My grandmother had anticipated this, not the wedding. Not the exclusion, but the assumption that I would never assert myself. Marisol called me an hour later. "This changes the balance," she said. "How?" I asked. "It gives you standing," she replied. "Not just to refuse, but to act." I stared at the screen. Act. For the first time, the path forward wasn't just defensive, it was directional. And somewhere between the quiet of my apartment and the weight of that realization, I understood something else. This wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. And the people who had underestimated my silence were about to learn the cost of ignoring it. I didn't tell my family about the clause. Not my parents, not Lauren, not Caleb. I didn't even let myself react emotionally to it at first. I read it again and again, not for comfort, but for precision. Eleanor Whitmore had written it in plain language, the way she did everything else. No theatrics, no ambiguity. In the event of contested administration or coercive disposition of trust assets, the contingent beneficiary shall have discretionary authority to pause, review, and redirect proceedings until equitable resolution is achieved. Equitable, not equal. Not fair in the way my family liked to define it. Equitable meant context mattered. Marisol explained it carefully. "This doesn't give you ownership," she said. "It gives you authority. Temporary, conditional, but very real." "What kind of authority?" I asked. "The kind that stops them from moving forward without you," she replied. "And the kind that lets you request independent oversight." Independent oversight. Those words settled in my chest with unexpected calm. "What happens if I invoke it?" I asked. "They'll fight it," she said. "Not in court immediately. In behavior, emotion, pressure." I nodded. "They already are." She smiled faintly. "Then you're prepared." I took the weekend to think, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to be intentional. This wasn't about punishing anyone. It wasn't about embarrassing my family or forcing apologies that wouldn't mean anything. It was about reclaiming the right to choose. On Monday morning, Marisol filed the notice. Invocation of contingent authority. Clean. Formal. Irreversible, once acknowledged. Copies went to the county, the trust administrators, and my parents' attorney. I went to work like any other day. By noon, my phone was vibrating constantly. I didn't answer. By 3 o'clock, Marisol called. "They're panicking," she said simply. I could hear the controlled satisfaction in her voice, the kind professionals allow themselves only when things are proceeding exactly as they should. "What does that look like?" I asked. "Your father's attorney is claiming the clause is obsolete," she replied. "Your mother called the trust office directly. Lauren requested an emergency meeting." "And?" I asked. "And none of that matters," she said. "The clause is valid. The trust administrator acknowledged it." I closed my eyes for a moment. Acknowledge. That was the word that had been missing my entire life. I didn't hear from my parents that day, but I did hear from Caleb. "Can we talk?" he asked. I agreed to meet him at a cafe near his office. Neutral ground. Public enough to keep things contained. He looked tired when he arrived, less confident than usual. His shoulders were tense, his jaw set in a way I recognized. They're freaking out, he said without preamble. I know, I replied. They don't understand why you're doing this, he continued. Dad says you're trying to take control. I stirred my coffee slowly. I'm trying to stop being controlled, he hesitated. You know Mom's health isn't great. There it was. The familiar pivot. I know, I said, and I'm not harming her. But this stress is the result of choices they made, I interrupted gently. Not ones I'm making now. He leaned back, frustrated. Why didn't you just sign? You could have walked away clean. I looked at him. Really looked. Because clean exits are only clean for the people who push you out, I said. I wanted the truth on record. He didn't argue with that. I didn't know they were excluding you from the wedding, he said quietly. I nodded. I know. That surprised him. I wasn't told, he said. I believe you, I replied. But you didn't ask either. That landed. When we left the cafe, he hugged me awkwardly, briefly. I hope this doesn't destroy everything, he said. I watched him walk away. It already did, I whispered, though he couldn't hear me. The next escalation came fast. My parents' attorney filed a formal objection to my invocation. Predictable. Procedural. Weak. Marisol responded within hours, citing precedent, attaching Eleanor's original documents, including her notarized intent statement. That last part mattered. My grandmother had anticipated resistance. She had documented everything. The trust administrator scheduled a mediation. Not between me and my family, between the parties responsible for execution. That distinction was critical. I attended with Marisol. My parents did not. Their attorney represented them. Lauren was not invited. For the first time, the conversation wasn't emotional. It was factual. Timelines, signatures, authority. The mediator asked a single question that shifted everything. Why was the contingent authority clause never disclosed to the beneficiary? Silence. The attorney cleared his throat. It was deemed unnecessary. By whom? The mediator asked. Another pause. By the primary trustees, he replied. And was the beneficiary ever informed of her rights under the trust? The mediator pressed. No, he admitted. That was it. Not dramatic, not explosive, but definitive. The mediator concluded the session with a recommendation for independent trust management, pending full review. Temporary removal of my parents as acting administrators. Not permanent, but public. When Marisol and I left the building, she didn't smile. She didn't need to. My phone rang as soon as we reached the sidewalk. My mother. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. Her voice was shaking. I don't know who you are anymore, she said. You've turned this into something ugly. I listened once, then deleted it, because ugliness wasn't what I felt. I felt calm, clear, grounded. That night, I sat at my table and wrote something for myself. Not a letter to them, a statement. I wrote down what I would and would not accept going forward. No pressure through intermediaries. No emotional leverage. No decisions made about me without me. It wasn't a demand. It was a boundary. And as I folded the paper and placed it in the drawer beside my grandmother's letter, I understood something important. The power I held now wasn't legal. The law had simply reflected it. The real shift had happened when I stopped trying to be reasonable in a system that depended on my silence. And the people who had benefited from that silence were about to feel what it was like to operate without it. Christmas came quietly that year. No invitations, no schedules, no carefully worded expectations. For the first time in my adult life, December passed without me bracing for impact. I stayed in Portland, worked until the 23rd, took the 24th off, bought groceries like it was any other week. On Christmas Eve, my mother sent a single text. We're leaving a plate for you, if you change your mind. I read it once, then set my phone face down on the counter. The phrase, leaving a plate, was one she'd used my entire childhood. It sounded generous, inclusive, but what it really meant was, you can show up if you behave. I cooked for myself that night. Nothing elaborate. Roasted chicken, vegetables, a glass of wine I'd been saving for no particular reason. As I ate alone at my small table, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't lonely. I was unobserved. That distinction mattered. 2 days later, the trust administrator sent a formal update. Independent oversight had been approved. Temporary, but effective immediately. All trust-related decisions would now require third-party authorization. Asset liquidation was frozen. Disbursements suspended. My parents no longer controlled the process. They could advise. They could request. They could not decide. The next call came from Lauren. She didn't start with anger. She started with charm. "You didn't have to do it this way," she said softly. "This was the only way," I replied. "You're punishing everyone," she continued, "for one misunderstanding." "It wasn't one," I said. "It was a pattern." She exhaled sharply. "You always do this. You hold on to things." I smiled faintly. "You mean I remember?" That irritated her. "You're going to cost us everything," she said. "Do you know how this looks? Trustees removed, county involved, people are talking." I leaned back against the counter. "I'm not responsible for how your actions look when someone finally pays attention." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that clarified everything. "You were never supposed to be this involved." There it was. Not denial. Not justification. Truth. I didn't respond. She continued, filling the silence. "You didn't want the business. You didn't want the house. You didn't even want to come to the wedding." "I wanted choice," I said. "You had it," she snapped. "No," I replied calmly. I had compliance. That ended the conversation. In January, the audit widened. The county requested supplemental records, clarification on amendments, justifications for asset transfers between related entities. Nothing explosive, but thorough. Marisol explained it simply. Once oversight changes, everything gets re-examined. Not because they suspect wrongdoing, because they can't afford to miss it. My father finally emailed me. Subject line: "This has gone too far." I opened it without hesitation. "This family has always handled its business privately," he wrote. "You've exposed us to unnecessary scrutiny. I don't recognize your behavior." I read it slowly, line by line. Then I typed my response. "I learned privacy from you. I learned silence. I learned how to make myself small so things could move forward without disruption. What you're calling exposure is accountability, and it only feels unfamiliar because I was never allowed to ask questions before." I didn't soften it. I didn't escalate it. I sent it as is. He didn't reply. That month, something else shifted. At work, I was offered a promotion. Not flashy. More responsibility. More visibility. My director framed it carefully. "You're steady under pressure. We need that." I accepted. For years, I'd been told I was dependable. Now, that trait meant something different. In February, the mediator issued a preliminary report. It didn't accuse my parents of misconduct, but it did note irregular governance practices and recommended restructuring. The family trust would continue, but not as it had been. Lauren called me the night she received the report. Her voice was tight, controlled. "This is your fault," she said. I didn't argue. "Everything was fine," she continued, "until you decided it wasn't." "That's not how truth works," I said. "It doesn't appear when someone speaks it. It exists before that." She hung up. I thought about my grandmother that night, about how carefully she'd written her documents, how she'd protected a version of me I hadn't yet become. She hadn't tried to save me. She'd left me the tools. By March, the holiday season felt distant, like something from another life. I noticed how much energy I had now, how little time I spent rehearsing conversations that never happened, how decisions felt lighter when they didn't require approval. The audit was still ongoing, the trust still unresolved, but the power dynamic had changed permanently. And that was the point, because for the first time, my family had to deal with me as I was. Not as an afterthought, not as a contingency, but as a person who could no longer be managed by silence, and they were running out of ways to pretend otherwise. The request came in March, framed as an olive branch. A formal invitation from the trust administrator, forwarded to all parties. Purpose: alignment meeting. Location: a conference room in downtown Portland. Neutral ground, glass walls, long table. No head seats. I knew immediately why they wanted it. They were losing control through paperwork. Now, they wanted to regain it through presence. Lauren called an hour after the notice went out. "This is good," she said. "We should all be in the same room." "We don't need to be," I replied. "But we will be," she said. "This is a chance to reset." Reset was her favorite word. It implied erasing what had already happened, without taking responsibility for it. "I'll attend," I said, with my attorney. Her pause was almost imperceptible. "Of course," she said. "Whatever makes you comfortable." The meeting was scheduled for the following Friday at 10 a.m. I didn't tell my parents I was coming. They found out when they walked into the room. I arrived early with Marisol. We chose seats halfway down the table, not at the end, not near the center. Deliberate. The trust administrator, a gray-haired man named Stephen Rowe, greeted us politely. He had the calm demeanor of someone who had seen families unravel in slow motion and knew better than to intervene emotionally. Lauren entered next, heels sharp against the tile, posture perfect. She gave me a tight smile and sat across from me. My parents came in together. My mother looked smaller than I remembered. My father looked irritated before he even sat down. No one hugged. No one asked how I was. Stephen opened the meeting with procedural language. Status updates, oversight conditions, audit timelines. Then he paused. "This meeting," he said, "was requested by the primary trustees to discuss future direction." My father leaned forward. "We want to resolve this internally." Marisol spoke before I could. "With respect, this process exists precisely because internal resolution was not possible." Lauren jumped in quickly. "That's not fair. We were blindsided." I looked at her. "You excluded me, then asked me to erase myself legally. That wasn't blind." My mother's lips pressed together. "We never meant to hurt you." "You meant to simplify," I replied. I was in the way. The room went quiet. Stephen cleared his throat. "Let's stay focused on the trust." My father sighed. "Emma, this is becoming a spectacle. The audit, the county, the administrators. It's unnecessary." "It's happening," I said. "That doesn't make it unnecessary." Lauren leaned forward, eyes sharp. "What do you want?" The question, again, but this time, it wasn't confident. "I want governance separated from family hierarchy," I said. "I want decisions documented and shared. And I want my role acknowledged formally." My mother shook her head. "You're asking for too much," Marisol responded calmly. "She's asking for transparency." Lauren laughed, short and humorless. "This is about the house, isn't it?" "No," I said. "It's about being treated like an adult." My father's voice hardened. "You don't even want the property." "That doesn't mean you get to decide what happens to it without me," I said. Stephen raised a hand. "The contingent authority clause is clear. Ms. Whitmore has standing." Lauren turned to him sharply. "This clause was never meant to be used like this." Stephen didn't flinch. "Clauses are meant to be used exactly as written." That landed. My mother finally looked at me directly. "Why now?" I considered the question carefully, because this time, I said, I wasn't willing to disappear quietly. Her eyes filled with something that looked like regret or fear. I couldn't tell the difference anymore. The meeting ended without resolution. No agreement, no compromise. But something had shifted. They had expected me to fold under pressure, to soften in person, to remember my place. I hadn't. As we gathered our things, Lauren caught my arm. "You think this ends well?" she whispered. "I think it ends honestly," I replied. That afternoon, Marisol received a call from the trust administrator. "They want to propose a restructuring," she said, "one that limits your authority." I smiled faintly. They're late. Because 2 hours earlier, Marisol had filed another document, a request for independent valuation of all trust assets, including the lake house, including several entities my family had never mentioned, entities that appeared in the accounting records as footnotes, shells, pass-throughs, the kind of things that don't matter until someone asks what's inside them. That evening, my father called for the first time in weeks. His voice was tight. "Did you know about the Ridgeway Holdings account?" he asked. I leaned back in my chair. "No, but I do now." Silence. "That account isn't part of the trust," he said. "It's referenced in trust disbursements," I replied, "which makes it relevant." "You're going to cause serious problems," he said. "I didn't create them," I replied. I noticed them. He hung up. 2 days later, the audit took a turn. The county issued a formal inquiry into related party transactions. Still not an accusation, but no longer routine. Lauren sent a message at midnight. We need to talk. Privately. No lawyers. I stared at the screen. Then I replied, no. Because private was where control thrived, and I was done meeting them there. The next morning, Marisol called. They found something, she said. My pulse quickened slightly. What kind of something? The kind that explains why they were in such a hurry to get your signature, she replied. I closed my eyes, because I knew then that this wasn't just about exclusion. It was about concealment. And whatever they had been hiding was about to come into the light. Marisol didn't tell me what they'd found over the phone. She never did when something mattered. Come to my office, she said. Now. It was 9:12 a.m. I was supposed to be in a planning meeting at 10. I sent a short message to my director, grabbed my coat, and left without explanation. Some things don't wait for permission. Marisol's office felt different that morning. Tighter. Focused. A stack of folders sat open on the conference table, documents arranged in careful rows like evidence rather than paperwork. She didn't offer coffee. That was my first clue. Ridgeway Holdings isn't just adjacent to the trust, she said. It's been used as a buffer. A buffer for what? I asked. She slid a document toward me. A bank statement. Older. 5 years back. Large transfers. Regular intervals. Always just under reporting thresholds. Money moving out of the trust-adjacent accounts and into Ridgeway Holdings, then later redistributed. To whom? I asked. She didn't answer. She turned the page. There was my father's name. My mother's. Lauren's. Not as recipients. As authorized signatories. My stomach tightened. Not with shock, but with recognition. The kind that settles when something finally makes sense. They were skimming? I asked quietly. No, Marisol replied. They were insulating. She explained it carefully. Ridgeway Holdings was set up as a private entity years ago, framed as a risk management vehicle. On paper, it was meant to protect family assets from market volatility. In practice, it functioned as a holding pen. Money moved into it during high-income years, moved out during expenses. Wedding expenses, lifestyle maintenance, strategic investments, all without clear disclosure to the trust beneficiaries, including me. They didn't steal, Marisol said. They reclassified. Is that legal? I asked. Her expression didn't change. That depends on intent and disclosure had been selective. I sat back slowly. This wasn't about my grandmother's house. That had been the trigger. This was about control of narrative and timing. If I signed the waiver, the trust would consolidate. The audit would stop. Ridgeway Holdings would remain peripheral, untouchable. They needed you gone, Marisol said. Cleanly. Before this came up, I thought of the wedding, the rush, the pressure, the way everything had accelerated once I hesitated. My absence wasn't personal. It was practical. What happens now? I asked. Marisol folded her hands. Now, the audit expands. The county issued a supplemental notice that afternoon. Scope widened. Third-party entities included. Full financial trail requested. Still not criminal, but no longer quiet. My parents didn't call that day. Lauren did. She sounded exhausted. They're tearing everything apart, she said. They're examining it, I replied. You know this wasn't malicious, she continued quickly. Dad was trying to protect the family. By hiding things from me, I said. From everyone, she corrected. This is how business works. I paused. This isn't business. It's inheritance. There was a long silence. You could still fix this, she said finally. Withdraw your authority. Let it stay internal. I thought of Eleanor's handwriting. The clause. The trust she'd placed not in my compliance, but in my discernment. No, I said. Lauren's voice hardened. You're choosing destruction. I'm choosing daylight, I replied. She hung up. That evening, my father emailed. No subject, just text. You've misunderstood everything. I read it once. Then I closed my laptop because understanding wasn't the issue. Intent was. The audit findings became harder to contain over the next 2 weeks. Not because they were explosive, but because they contradicted the image my family had spent decades maintaining. There were questions now. From advisors, from extended relatives, from people who had never been invited into the room before. My parents stopped attending certain events. Lauren went quiet on social media. Caleb texted once. I didn't know, he wrote. I know, I replied. That was the first honest exchange we'd had in years. The mediator scheduled another session. This time, my parents attended. They looked older, not frail, just worn. Stephen Rowe spoke plainly. The issue is not criminality, he said. It's governance. And governance failed. My father bristled. We built this. And you managed it privately, Stephen replied. But private management requires full disclosure to beneficiaries. That didn't occur. My mother spoke then, her voice thin. We were protecting her, she said, gesturing toward me. She doesn't want this responsibility. I met her eyes. You never asked me, I said. She looked away. Stephen concluded the meeting with a recommendation. Permanent independent trust management. No family members as administrators. Annual reporting to all beneficiaries, including me. Lauren stood abruptly. This is insane. No, Stephen replied calmly. This is standard. When the meeting ended, no one approached me. No apologies. No explanations. Just distance. That night, I sat alone in my apartment. The city quiet outside my window. I thought about how close I'd come to signing away my name on a page I hadn't been allowed to read properly. How easily my role could have ended, not with a fight, but with a pen. And I understood something that settled deeply in my bones. The most dangerous betrayals aren't loud. They're efficient. They happen when everyone assumes you'll comply. The county finalized its report in early May. No penalties, no charges, but a formal record, a public one, and a note in the closing summary that said more than any accusation ever could. Inadequate disclosure created conditions for inequitable treatment of a beneficiary. I printed that sentence and folded it into my grandmother's letter, not as evidence, as closure. Lauren didn't speak to me again after that. My mother sent a card. No message. My father remained silent. But something else happened. I received a call from the independent trust manager. He wanted to discuss future planning, not to ask permission, to offer inclusion. For the first time, my role wasn't symbolic. It was functional. And as I listened to him outline options, timelines, responsibilities, I realized something quietly profound. They had spent years trying to keep me small to maintain control, and all it had taken to undo that was my refusal to disappear. The truth hadn't destroyed them. It had simply removed the cover. And once the cover was gone, everything that had been built on silence began to crack. The first real apology came in June. Not from Lauren, not from my father, from my mother. She called on a Sunday afternoon, the kind of quiet hour she used to reserve for things she didn't want overheard. I almost didn't answer. Not out of anger, out of habit. For years, answering had meant bracing myself, but this time, I was curious. Emma, she said, and her voice cracked immediately. No preamble, no control. I stayed silent. I don't know how we got here, she continued. I don't recognize this family anymore. I thought about that for a moment before responding. This is the first time I do, I said. She took a shaky breath. Your father is struggling. I know, I replied. He feels exposed, she said, humiliated. I leaned back on my couch, staring at the ceiling. He's feeling what it's like to be seen without consent. She didn't like that. I could hear it. We didn't mean to hurt you, she said again, softer this time. I chose my words carefully. Intent doesn't undo impact. Silence stretched between us. Not the old silence. This one felt heavier. Earned. We were trying to protect the family, she said finally. You were protecting control, I replied. Those aren't the same thing. She whispered my name, the way she had when I was a child and afraid of storms. I wish you'd just talk to us, she said. I closed my eyes. I tried, for years. You just didn't hear me, because I wasn't loud enough. That was the truth neither of us had ever said out loud. She didn't ask me to come over. She didn't ask me to fix anything. She said one last thing before hanging up. I don't know how to be your mother without managing you. And for the first time, I felt something close to compassion, because that sentence explained everything. A week later, the independent trust manager, David Harlan, asked to meet. Not formally. Coffee. Downtown. He was in his 50s. Calm, methodical. the kind of man who didn't confuse authority with volume. "I want to be clear," he said once we sat down. "I don't represent your parents' interests. I represent the trust." "I understand," I replied. "But you," he continued, "are a beneficiary who has been historically underinformed. That matters." He slid a folder across the table. Options. Real ones. Participation in future planning. Advisory input. Clear reporting schedules. Nothing dramatic. Everything respectful. "For the record," he added, "you handled this with restraint. Most people don't." "I didn't want revenge," I said. "I wanted visibility." He nodded. "You got it." That afternoon, I walked through my neighborhood longer than usual, past familiar houses, familiar sidewalks, familiar quiet. For the first time, the world felt proportionate. At work, my promotion became official. New responsibilities, new projects. No fanfare. I didn't tell my family. I didn't need to. Lauren reached out once more in late June. A text. Short. "You won." I stared at it for a long time. Then I typed back. This wasn't a competition. She didn't reply. In July, the lake house came up again, not as a sale, as a discussion. David asked how I felt about it, whether I had interest, sentimental or otherwise. I surprised myself with my answer. "I want to visit it again," I said, without pressure. "Take your time," he replied. "There's no deadline." No deadline. I drove to Bend a week later, alone. The house looked the same, quiet, patient. I walked through each room slowly, touched the banister, opened drawers. Let the space exist without expectation. On the back of the shelf in the study, I found another envelope. My name. My grandmother's handwriting. Inside was a single sentence. "They will underestimate you until you stop agreeing to be underestimated." I sat on the floor and laughed softly. Not because it was funny, because it was true. By August, the fallout had settled into something manageable. My parents kept their distance. Not hostile, not warm, careful. Caleb invited me to lunch once. We talked about neutral things, work, weather, his uncertainty about the company. He didn't ask me to fix anything. That felt like progress. I noticed something else, too. Without the constant hum of family expectation, my life felt larger, not busier, clearer. I slept better, made decisions faster, spoke less, but more precisely. I stopped anticipating disappointment because I no longer centered my choices around avoiding it. One evening, I opened the folder on my laptop labeled Family. I scrolled through the emails, the documents, the screenshots. Then I closed it. Not deleted, just closed. Because I didn't need to keep reliving it to justify where I stood. The power had already shifted. Not because I'd taken something from them, but because I'd taken myself back. And that kind of shift doesn't reverse. It's simple. The invitation arrived in September, printed on thick cream paper. My name centered carefully, as if precision might undo history. Family dinner, Lake Oswego, Saturday at 6. No apology, no explanation. Just an assumption. I stared at the envelope longer than necessary before setting it down on the kitchen counter. For years, an invitation like this would have sent me into a quiet spiral. What to wear, what not to say, how to arrive without disrupting the balance. This time, I felt none of that. I called Marisol. "You don't need legal advice for dinner," she said after I explained. "I know," I replied. "I just want to be clear." She paused. Clear about what? About whether going would move me backward. She didn't answer immediately. "Ask yourself this," she said finally. "Are they inviting you as an equal or as a problem they think they can finally manage?" That night, I slept on it. In the morning, I RSVP'd yes. Not because I owed them anything, but because I wanted to see who they were, now that control had been taken off the table. Saturday evening arrived cool and quiet. I drove to my parents' house just after sunset. The lights were on inside. Cars lined the driveway. Lauren's, Caleb's, one unfamiliar sedan. I walked in without hesitation. My mother greeted me first. She hugged me, briefly, carefully, as if unsure whether she still had permission. "You look—" "I am," I replied. My father stood near the fireplace, hands clasped behind his back. He nodded once. No smile, no warmth, but no anger either. Lauren entered last. She froze for half a second when she saw me. Then she recovered. "Emma," she said. You came. I said I would, I replied. Dinner unfolded politely. Too politely. Conversations stayed on safe topics: work, travel, neutral acquaintances. No one mentioned the trust, the audit, the house. The silence wasn't peace, it was avoidance. Halfway through the meal, my father cleared his throat. We wanted to talk about the future, he said. There it was. I'm listening, I replied. Lauren jumped in quickly. Things have been difficult, but we're still family. I waited. My mother reached for her glass. We thought maybe it was time to move forward. From what? I asked. She faltered. My father spoke instead. From conflict. I nodded slowly. Conflict ends when behavior changes, not when it's ignored. The table went quiet. Lauren's voice sharpened. What do you want us to say? I met her eyes. Nothing. If nothing has changed, that landed harder than any accusation. My mother looked genuinely confused. You don't want an apology? I want accountability, I said. Those aren't the same. My father's jaw tightened. We've lost enough already. I leaned back in my chair. So have I. Caleb shifted uncomfortably. Can we not do this tonight? We are doing this tonight, Lauren snapped, then caught herself. I looked at her. You invited me. Not to eat, to see if I'd behave. Her face flushed. She didn't deny it. I came. I continued. I listened. And now I'm leaving. I stood calmly, pushed in my chair. My mother's voice trembled. Emma, please. I paused at the doorway. I'm not angry, I said, but I won't be managed anymore. If you want me in your life, it has to be without conditions. No one followed me. The drive home felt lighter than the drive there. 2 weeks later, the trust manager sent an update. Everything finalized. Oversight permanent. Reporting schedules locked. Stability. Lauren sent a message a few days after that. I don't know how to relate to you now. I typed my response carefully. Without control, you'll have to try respect. She never replied. In October, something unexpected happened. I received a call from a distant relative, my Aunt Margaret. Someone who had always hovered at the edges of family events. I just wanted to say, she said quietly, your grandmother would be proud. I swallowed. She saw things before the rest of us, my aunt continued. She tried to say something once. No one listened. I did, I replied. That fall, I made a decision. I changed my emergency contact, updated my documents, simplified my life in small but deliberate ways, not cutting people off. Just choosing who had access. I visited the lake house one last time before winter. Walked the dock, watched the water. Let the place exist without pressure to decide its fate. Some things don't need to be claimed to be honored. When Thanksgiving approached, no invitation came. I didn't miss it. I cooked again, alone, peacefully. That night, I realized something important. They had invited me back when they thought they could still contain me. They stopped inviting me when they realized they couldn't. And that was fine, because inclusion that requires shrinking is just another form of exclusion. I wasn't losing my family. I was losing a role I'd never agreed to play. And for the first time, that felt like gain. The year ended without ceremony. No final confrontation. No dramatic reconciliation. No apology that wrapped everything up neatly and made it easier to explain at dinner parties. Just quiet. And for the first time in my life, quiet didn't feel like punishment. In December, I received the final confirmation from the trust office. All governance changes were complete. Independent oversight permanent. Annual reports scheduled. My role defined clearly, in writing, without ambiguity or hidden clauses. I read the document once. Then I filed it away. Not because it didn't matter, but because it no longer defined me. At work, I settled into my new position fully. The learning curve was steep, the expectations higher, but no one questioned whether I belonged. I wasn't someone's daughter or sister or problem to manage. I was a professional with authority earned the slow way. That mattered more than I'd expected. A few days before Christmas, my mother sent another message. Not an invitation. Just a sentence. I hope you're well. I read it. I believe she meant it. And I didn't reply. Not out of cruelty. Out of honesty. Because wishing me well was not the same as being willing to change. On Christmas Eve, I drove to the coast. booked a small room overlooking the water, walked the beach at dusk while the sky dimmed into something soft and forgiving. I thought about the wedding I hadn't attended, the documents I hadn't signed, the life I hadn't agreed to live quietly anymore. I thought about how often women like me are taught that endurance is virtue, that silence is maturity, that being easy to manage makes you lovable. None of that had protected me. What protected me was clarity. I didn't hate my family. That surprised people when I said it out loud. I don't hate them, I told a friend once. I just stopped sacrificing myself to make them comfortable. In January, the lake house decision came up one last time. David, the trust manager, asked if I wanted to make a recommendation. I didn't rush to answer. I think it should stay, I said finally. For now. For what purpose? He asked. For remembering, I replied. Not everything has to be optimized. He nodded, as if he understood exactly what I meant. Lauren never reached out again. Neither did my father. Caleb sent a birthday text in February. Short, awkward, genuine. I thanked him. That was enough. By spring, the story had stopped circulating. Families move on. So do reputations. Without new fuel, even the most carefully maintained narratives fade. I noticed how little I thought about them now. Not because I'd forgotten, because I'd integrated the truth. I wasn't excluded because I was difficult. I was excluded because I was inconvenient to control. Once I understood that, the shame dissolved. What remained was choice. One afternoon in April, I pulled out my grandmother's letter again. The first one. The one she'd written years before I'd ever needed it. She had seen what I couldn't at the time. That love, when tied to compliance, isn't love. It's leverage. And leverage only works if you're willing to be pulled. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the drawer. Not because I needed the reminder anymore, but because some truths deserve to be honored, even after they've done their work. If there's a lesson in all of this, it isn't about revenge. I didn't expose my family to punish them. I didn't assert my rights to humiliate anyone. I didn't refuse to sign because I wanted to win. I did it because I wanted to stop disappearing. And that's the part no one prepares you for. When you finally choose yourself, some people won't fight you. They'll simply step back and reveal how conditional their love always was. That hurts. But it also frees you. Because once you stop negotiating your worth, the world rearranges itself around that decision. You become calmer, clearer, harder to manipulate. Not louder, just solid. If you're listening to this and something in it feels familiar, if you've ever been excluded, minimized, or quietly managed by people who claimed to love you, hear this. You don't need a dramatic exit. You don't need their understanding. You don't need permission. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is sign nothing, explain nothing, and walk forward anyway. If this story resonated with you, leave a comment and share what stood out. If you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and protecting your peace, you're not alone. And if you want more stories like this, about family drama, betrayal, inheritance, and what happens when the tables finally turn, make sure to like and subscribe. Because choosing yourself isn't the end of family. It's the beginning of dignity. And that is something no one can take from you again.